This is the Philanthropy Show, connecting and inspiring philanthropy.
Welcome to the Philanthropy Show. I'm your host, Luann Saraga Walters, and we are on the road in downtown Jacksonville, Florida. We're at the home of the new Jessie Ball duPont Center for Nonprofits. This building, the former Hayden Burns Library, 3 stories tall, 125,000 square feet, just experienced more than $20 million in renovation love and is now home to over 20 nonprofits. This is a vision in collaboration on many levels. Let's go inside. Hard to believe this building sat vacant for 10 years, since 2005. But if you remember the Hayden Burns Library, it's still very much the same. Great care has been taken to preserve much of the personality and beauty that the Hayden Burns Library was known for. And a great deal of thought has been put into making this a centerpiece for nonprofit collaboration. To tell us more about that, let's meet our guests for today's show. Well, hello, you two.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? This is fun.
This is great fun.
I just was able to take a quick visit around the outside and over to the atrium. This is beautiful, coming along really well. Yes. It's nearly finished. So let me introduce you really quickly. We have Sherry Magill, President and CEO of the Jessie Ball duPont Fund. Thank you so much. This center, kind of absolutely driven by the Jessie Ball duPont Fund and a lot of your vision, and wanted to really dive into that. As well as Rena Coughlin, President and CEO of the Nonprofit Center of Northeast Florida.
Hello.
Fantastic to have you here. And I'm just gonna say, in my opinion, you two ladies are 2 of the biggest visionaries in Florida. And what you have done as a team in getting everybody to think about these processes ahead of time is really amazing.
Thank you.
One of the reasons that Sharon and I wanted to come up here to do this show was because we have a passion for the nonprofit sector, the collaboration, and everything that type of efficiency and effectiveness can do in a community, instead of having these silos, going. So I want to dive into that, but first, finding out a little bit about you two and how you're acquainted through your organizations and what your organizations do. So, Rena, why don't we start over here with you and tell us how you came to the nonprofit sector and how you came to the Nonprofit Center.
Well, I think it's great that I'm here with Sherry, because Sherry has a lot to do with it. I moved to Jacksonville in 2001. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and started right away in nonprofit work. I was running an organization called Girls Inc. And at the same time, several of the key visionaries in our community had done a public study and decided that what this community really needed was a support framework for the nonprofit sector to strengthen it, and had begun to build and launch and open a nonprofit center. And running a small nonprofit with a lot of needs, I immediately became addicted to the nonprofit center. I was like their #1 user. I was on the phone with them all the time. It was a huge benefit to me in building the capacity of my organization. So when the first CEO at the nonprofit center left, I came over to run it as its biggest fan.
Awesome.
So been there ever since. It's been 10 years this year. And the partnership with the philanthropists in the community is essential to the Nonprofit Center, and the duPont Fund really was the driving force behind creating the Nonprofit Center. So
I didn't know that history, so that's interesting too. And Sherry, your background.
Well, I grew up in the Deep South. I went into higher education. I thought I was going to be a small college president or academic dean or professor, and as luck would have it, the Jessie Ball duPont Fund was looking for a program officer to do their education work in 1991, and I came to Jacksonville in 1991 to work for the fund. So I've been at the fund for 24 years. I became the executive director in 93, promoted to president in 2000, and it's just work I have great passion for, and great passion for the nonprofit sector. So
I think a lot of people are familiar with the Jessie Ball duPont Fund from the name and from your red and white logo. What is it, and specifically, can you talk to the areas that you're supporting, that the fund is supporting? Because I know that's tied back definitely to Mrs. DuPont.
Yeah, so Mrs. DuPont's will is a little bit, well, it's interesting. I don't know how unique it is, because if you look at that era of wealthy people when they created foundations, I think they all did something that was a little bit unique to them. So Mrs. DuPont restricted the fund's direct grant making to organizations she funded in the early 1960s. But it's a diverse, broad group of organizations. From higher ed, institutions like Yale and Georgetown, University of Florida and FSU, University of Miami, over 3 dozen small private colleges located throughout the South, to the tiniest congregation in a place like Port St. Joe. It might have 12 families. And so if you really look at what she did, she funded organizations at a community level. Today we talk about it being place-based philanthropy. She was ahead of her time in that respect. So 100 organizations we may fund directly in the state of Florida, for example, 100 in Virginia, 60 in the state of Delaware, and then certain locations throughout the South primarily, but not just in the South. She funded some organizations in California and Colorado and Texas. But her philanthropy was really concentrated in states and communities and in people that she knew, and communities that were served by organizations, nonprofit organizations, whether it was the church, the school and college, or what we think of as the traditional 501c3. It might be a historic preservation group of folks trying to keep the history of a place alive. So I think she was very rooted in community and in places.
That explanation too, and the knowing of that makes sense to open a nonprofit center to fund that, because that's very place-based, that's very community-driven. You're educating and you're a resource for the community of nonprofits that are here, as well as this building, which is fantastic. And there's so much to this building. There's so much, but we got a sneak peek about a week ago from Leah Donnellan, VP of the Nonprofit Center, and she took us around and showed us some of the different things that the thought that was really put into this. And I think what I wanted to talk to the both of you about is, when I'm looking around this, number one, you've kept the beauty and the personality of this, the Hayden Burns Library. You did a lot of research to get that. But then number two, you really went into a lot of different levels in collaborating, bringing the nonprofits together, having the knowledge of what they need so that they can best work together in a unified space, right? Going into that. So tell me, what was some of the thinking behind the development of this center from that aspect of knowing, here's this community, again, Sherry, place-based, we want to help the entire community, not just this specific group, and spreading out. That's a lot.
Well, we'll do this together. So I'll go first and Rena will add, let's say. So professionally, I've dreamed about this building for probably 2 decades.
Wow.
We were participants.
This particular building?
No.
Okay.
A place like this.
Okay.
So there are about 300 of these nationally now, but they're not as big as this. And
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to know, where this was replicated. So did you study those then? Okay.
Yep, Rena did too. We did that independent of one another. But the first time
Great minds think alike, right?
Yeah, the first time I saw something like this was in Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay.
And we were a financial partner in that. And the Longwood Foundation developed a high-rise building that the DuPont company gifted to the foundation.
Okay.
But that was in 1998. What drove this shared concept, in part, was financial necessity and technology. And then this building just lent itself to openness and color and light and playfulness and being together. It's a public library. And if you had come in this building before it was retrofitted and rebuilt, what you would see is just this floor that had no walls. It was just enormously open. A reading room was here, et cetera, et cetera. So I think multiple things drove the development of what you see today. But if I had to use a word that's not overused, I would use the word share as opposed to collaborate. Of course, we expect co-location to drive collaboration. But this is a highly collaborative community and sector already.
Amen.
We are building on a history of collaboration.
And I'm learning that with each person that we're talking to while we're here for this shoot of 4 shows. It's just amazing what you've done. But you were looking into the same thing, she said separately, about a building that could have, tell me about the thinking behind that, Rena.
Well, I think, as Sherry said, that you start learning about capacity building in a larger sense, not just a workshop, but sort of a continuous, long-term investment in building the strength of the sector. And part of that usually has to do with supporting their infrastructure and their physical needs as well. And so, we had become part of a national network of nonprofit centers that supports shared service buildings. And we're in 2005. And I got a little ahead of myself and immediately wanted to raise a bunch of money and buy one, and let's all live and work together. I'm really glad I didn't succeed, because it wouldn't have been anywhere as well done as it would have been done more or less on the cheap, the way we sometimes do things in the sector. But I think that the coming together of both, what our vision was. We actually did a 2020 visioning in our organization to be in a shared services
at the
building.
nonprofit center.
Yeah, and I think that we envisioned a LEED certified building, and one where there was huge community space, and it's terrific that those two visions sort of came together. Luckily, one of us had the assets to make it happen.
Sherry, you just said too that this community in Northeast Florida is already so driven by that shared culture. Where does that come from? I mean, that's so vital, and that's something that I think a lot of communities are striving to get to, but not quite sure how to implement that.
I've thought about it a lot, as you might guess. I travel a lot, I go to a lot of communities, and I say this honestly. Jacksonville's the most collaborative community that I visit, that I work in. I think there are multiple reasons that have resulted in that kind of ethic. One is consolidated government. It's kind of in our DNA to think about the whole county as opposed to just this neighborhood. Now, we are a county of neighborhoods, and we're also a county of sprawl.
Well, and what is that Jacksonville is the largest landmass city or something because of how spread out it is?
It's a gift and it's a burden. But I think the fact that the city and the county have had to work together for so many years, it kind of, again, I think it's in our DNA. I think the other thing is necessity is the mother of invention, and this is a community of scarce resources. And I think scarcity often drives us to figure out, well, how can we do it anyway? And I just watching human behavior and people who are activists and want something good to happen in their community, they're gonna figure out how to do it.
Passion driven.
Almost, exactly. And, I hope this, resonates with someone, but this is a sector that's been led by women. And I don't, it's not that I don't think male leadership allows folks to collaborate or share. I think they do as well, but I know the women in this community just come at it in terms of how do we do this together. And fourth thing, the Jacksonville Community Council Inc., which was the organization that housed the nonprofit study that we did in 97, 98 that Rena referenced. They do a great job of bringing just regular citizens together to study a local challenge and also try to figure out how do we meet that challenge. And I think the 98 study that we did on the nonprofit sector, that was a big study. A lot of people participated in that. And I think it too helped us figure out how are we going to collaborate, how are we going to share, how are we going to do this, lead this work together.
That's fabulous.
So I've thought about it a lot, and I've got multiple answers to the question.
And if you could create a template of that, you could franchise it and just really,
Well, that's
lift
one
the
thing
entire sector
we've actually
nationwide.
found out that you can't transport a lot of the special
Because it's local to the community, like you were saying.
Yeah, but I do, to just continue what Sherry was thinking and saying, the nonprofits in the midst of the recession, we all got together and we had a series of meetings. Over 150 nonprofit leaders and philanthropists and consultants came together and worked for about 1,000 hours to say, we said, look, this took us by a little bit by surprise when it shouldn't have, and we were not prepared, and so we don't want this to happen again. So what is it that we need to do? And just the fact that they all wanted to work together to devise a strategy for success post-recession was important. But the things that they collectively identified as important to their work going forward were all about, all right, how do we collect data and share it together? How do we identify who else is working in the sector and what are they doing, and how do we leverage those assets? How do we strengthen our boards? How do we advocate more effectively? Those were the
That's
four.
a lot of also what drives a lot of the classes, and resources available through the nonprofit center.
Right. Well, and that's driven by, these folks didn't say, well, we need more funding for us. They identified things that were shared resources that could be made available as community platforms.
And I
for
like
the
what
rest
you
of the
called
sector.
it, the strategy for success. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about that, about the nonprofits who are coming into this building and some of those layers that went into the thinking of how to create a strategy for success for the nonprofits within this building. So we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back with the Philanthropy Show.
Follow the Philanthropy Show on Facebook for behind-the-scenes action, polls, and commentary. This show sponsored in part by
My Paper Pusher. Consider it done.
The Philanthropy Show is on demand every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at both thephilanthropyshow.com and YouTube/WatchMVVP TV.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show. We are shooting today on location. We're on the road in downtown Jacksonville, Florida at the Jessie Ball duPont Center for Nonprofits with none other than Sherry Magill from the Jessie Ball duPont Fund and Rena Coughlin from the Nonprofit Center talking about this amazing building, which, as we were talking in the break, this is the beautiful green tile, but this is green in another way, as we know, the environmentally friendly, from the roof, the solar panels, all the way down to the cistern, which is used to recycle and water your gardens, I think you were just saying. A lot of thought went into this. So let's talk about those different layers too. How did you, in planning this building, how did you accomplish so many things? Wow. And what were you thinking about?
I am an absolute glutton for punishment, obviously. We wanted this building to be a demonstration project in multiple ways. So it's a demonstration project in terms of nonprofits under one roof sharing. It's a model of collaboration. Given the world we live in, this building just had to be as green as it possibly could be. So we wanted a responsible repurposing and retrofitting of a building that was built in 1965. It's not easy to do this. It will be LEED certified, probably gold. You can't get to platinum on a building like this. So what I really wanted was to bring the latest thinking from energy conservation to water conservation to how to use technology to reduce operating costs. So if you if you're me, the way I approach it is, how do you do it less expensively but do it better? Well, energy is such a driver. You can't live without energy. You know, it's the basis of everything. And so it really became a puzzle and a challenge. What could you do in a building like this? And we have great architects and great builders. And so we simply put the question out there. And I'm a little geeky when it comes to this stuff. I read a lot about energy conservation. And so there were certain things that I knew were technologically possible. And so again, it became a puzzle, it became a question. So, you know, I've been in buildings where they recycle the water. What would that look like in a building like this? I've been in buildings where, you know, they're trying to build net zero buildings, big buildings. And so could you do that in Jacksonville? How close could you get? This building will never be net zero energy. It's impossible to do that. But we replaced, you know, that's over $1 million worth of glass walls. That's double pane thermal up to Florida wind codes. Those glass walls were single pane. You know, well, you shouldn't be doing that in 2015. The roof, the architect, Taylor Hartwick, had this amazing imagination. And the third floor courtyard roof was, I think, designed from the very beginning to be somewhat green. He had planters up there. Well, I wanted a roof that was green with vegetation, but something people could play on. So it's a putting green.
I love that.
These South Gardens were here. I mean, we've refurbished them and planted, it's xeriscaped really, but if you look at the south side of this building, the tile screen and the bronze screen, that screen was there to cool the building. The fins are there to cool the building.
Yeah, and don't they block the wind and, yeah.
So it was always designed with nature. I mean, that's the way Taylor designed it. And so I think what we did was try to, as much as possible, again, this will never be a zero energy building, but to use that concept and just challenge the architect and the builder, how close to that could you get? Now, I don't know the answer to the riddle yet. I'm waiting to see the utility bills. But, you know, it's programmed. Rena is a tenant. There's no thermostat in her box. So, you know, sorry, but we're being a little bit dictatorial about that, but with a purpose. So, you know, it remains to be seen what the carbon emissions will be, what the utility use will be, but we wanted to drive a conversation.
I think the fact that you even had the forward thinking to go down that path and say, if we're going to do this, then let's also look at it from energy conservation, water conservation, all the numbers of things, in addition to resource conservation, because the nonprofits who come in here have this incredible, you talk about technology. I was talking with, I think, your IT guy, and he was talking about having laid fiber within, so it's an internal network, which is a great, great thing. And how many nonprofits have you worked for or visited that you can't get on because the signal is so small, because the budget that they have to have any kind of internet is this big. So, and you're delayed with your downloads and whatnot. So from a nonprofit standpoint, what's this building like?
Well, I want to actually also tell the folks that not only was Sherry dealing with trustees and bankers and architects in the city, but she also brought the tenants into the conversation early. So that, you know, for instance, you were asking, you know, what's the process? Well, one of the early parts of the process was not even folks who necessarily end up being tenants, but she brought together focus groups of nonprofits saying, if you were in a shared space, what would you value?
That's awesome.
And so, you know, we did a series of conversations with, you know, dozens of nonprofits and gave them free rein. Think about, you know, what's your wildest dream about living together and working together, and what would that look like? So that was so early on in the process that it, you know, that's a big gamble, because you're putting out there you know, dream it, and
a wish
we're going to
list,
see if
basically.
we can, And a lot of the things that people named were, you know, we want to work and live in a building that is highly considerate of the environment and of each other, and that actually reflects the value and the impact of the sector. And I think, check, 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 and check.
The other aspect of this is what can grow out of this building, because you took the time to ask what the nonprofits really needed, what they really wanted to work in an environment. Because, working in the nonprofit world, you may not want to come into a building that's just leaking energy, right? You want to be aware of where you're working. You want to live it and work with that same philosophy. But what can come out of this? I mean, I look at your shared lunch space, and like when Leah and I were talking, and she mentioned, who knows what two employees who work for two different nonprofits may be talking about something and stumble upon the fact that, hey, they have some shared journey that they can go on from two different projects that by collaborating, they're then benefiting the community even more.
Right.
Well, speak to that a little bit. What's the
what we know
vision
from
there?
Collaboration, from it becoming this very attractive thing, both from the funding community and the nonprofit sector, trying to figure out what's a valuable collaboration and how do you incent them, and the thinking now is the more serendipitous and organic they are, the stronger they are. And so this is a perfect way to discover and not force collaborations. Because I think, going back to the idea, this is shared space, shared learning, shared opportunities. And this isn't just about the 16 or 18 or 20 tenants here. It's really about bringing the nonprofit sector into a place where those organic connections can be made. And that's one of the reasons why the duPont Fund is invested in hiring a building animator for this space. Someone who actually thinks about and gets to know not only the tenants, but what's going on in the community, so that they can nudge those collaborations along or nudge those relationships.
So is this going to be one person who kind of is in the know of what all the nonprofits are doing?
Yep.
So like the networker, the connector.
Bingo. Yeah, so not only will they be the physical scheduler and programmer, so coordinating events, but that gives them the inside look at what's going on and what are people interested in, valued.
That's another layer.
Yes.
This is what I'm talking about. You seriously have thought on from here to here and here to here. You have thought of this expanse. This is a humongous. This is a huge, wonderful example of what you can do when you really have the vision toward doing that. We have to take another break again, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about that and the hopes for. This was a vision for a long time. Like you said, you've been thinking about it for 2 decades, but now going from here to where? So what's that going to look like for the nonprofit community, for the nonprofit center, for the Jessie Ball duPont Fund? So we're going to take another short break, and we'll be right back with the Philanthropy Show. We've taken the show on the road, and we would like to thank our studio sponsor, the Nonprofit Leadership Center of Tampa Bay, which really makes all of the shows that we shoot in Tampa Bay possible. Thank you so much. On the road, we are learning such amazing and incredible things about all of the amazing work that's being done in the nonprofit communities throughout the state of Florida and beyond, and we would love to come to you. We have sponsorship opportunities available, which would help us produce 4 shows about your nonprofit community. Really essential, that would help educate, uplift, and empower other nonprofit staff, board members, and donors. So contact us today, and we could be driving the Philanthropy Show into your community tomorrow. Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show. Wow, we have really enjoyed being at the Jessie Ball duPont Center here in Jacksonville, downtown Jacksonville. The former Hayden Burns Library turned into this amazing center for nonprofits. And before the break, we were talking about, this was a vision to come to here. And before I can let you go, yay, I'm going to ask you for the next one. Where does Jacksonville go from here with the nonprofit sector now that you have this amazing space, shared space, potential for collaboration, potential for collective impact? What do you see for Jacksonville?
Yeah. So this is not new. One of the greatest challenges communities have is political and business leaders do not understand the role of the nonprofit sector. They don't understand how we finance it. They don't understand how we cooperate with them. They don't understand how important we are. So one theory here is if enough of us get under the same roof, and we have, without public money and without private sector investment, with the exception of the Jessie Ball duPont Fund, brought a $25 million project into, you know, a downtown that is having a hard time realizing how to rebirth itself. I would say we put a stake in the ground. We have arrived. Take us seriously. We are to be reckoned with. We are not the stupid people. We're not just service providers. We are absolutely the people who build community, who own the quality of life space, and business and government has to figure out how to invest in what we do. They cannot continue to expect us to deliver and not make an investment. So I would say with this project, the Jessie Ball duPont Fund, and I mean the fund, has made an enormous financial investment in a building that the city built and owned, and I would argue as a taxpayer, a resident, and a citizen of Duval County had an obligation to do something with, and not let it sit here vacant for 10 years and deteriorate. So if I sound passionate about it, I am. So I would say we're here, we ain't going anywhere. Take us seriously and invest in what this sector does.
Powerful stuff.
Well, and you know, we've already heard it from folks who visited. Well, wait, what are nonprofits doing in a nice place like this?
You're supposed to have rundown, the ceiling's leaking, the carpet's torn, the toilets don't flush.
It should be hand-me-down space, right? And I think this is part of really the new messaging around the nonprofit sector, that if you want quality outcomes, you have to hire the best people. You have to invest in the organization's ability to have the best technology, to collect the best data, to analyze it, and to make the right investments in programming. We can stay where we were as a charitable sector, or we can move into an organizational entity that includes for-profit, non-profit. Everybody's interested in a better community, and so we're just equal players in it.
But I love
a statement about that.
I love that you said that about quality, and also that you've said it about being a player, an equal player. And number one, you know, the nonprofit sector, the industry, is the third largest behind retail, trade, and manufacturing in the United States. 10.7 million people are employed. Now, that doesn't include the numbers of board members who volunteer for those nonprofits, or the numbers of donors who support those nonprofits. There's a lot of people invested in the nonprofit sector. But number two, that lack mentality that we've got to just really shoestring budget ourselves. I do hear that more and more. We had a guest on the show a couple of weeks ago who was really talking about that. She was impassioned about, let's step away from this, just like you're saying, Rena, and I totally agree with you on that, because in order to really do the best work that we can for those donors' dollars, or the people who are volunteering their time, we have to invest in our employees, we have to invest in our resources. Thank you, Sherry, for what you've done for Northeast Florida with this, with the Jessie Ball duPont Fund, to enable these nonprofits to do their best. Because the more we have resources like this, the more responsible we're being to the donors who are investing their dollars in those nonprofits by helping them achieve as much as they can. I really believe in that. I love what you guys are doing. We're going to move now into our Truth or Care section, which is it's the personal ending of the Philanthropy Show, and that is, what is your heart's definition of philanthropy? Why do you do what you do? It might be a story, it might be a transformative experience, something that it's not necessarily your head that's saying this is why I need to do it, but your heart. Why? What does that mean to you? What is philanthropy? Who would like to go first? Fickle finger of fate. It's going to choose Rena.
I'm happy.
Sherry.
Okay.
Whatever. Go ahead, Sherry.
Go first. So I think, we're all formed by families and parents and communities and schools and activities when we're young, and the church, and you name it. But I think where I come out is with this kind of simple golden rule idea, which is I think we have an obligation to treat people the way we'd like to be treated. And I think folks who are vulnerable, whether that's financially or emotionally, you name it, none of us asked to be born. And whether it comes from the church, in my case the church and scouting, our obligation is to leave the place better than we found it. And so if I think about philanthropy, philanthropy is not, as Rena said, simply charity. I think, Mrs. DuPont talked about it being a social obligation. I think we have an obligation as people who share the planet with other people who aren't responsible for our own creation to do good works. And philanthropy is a means of taking private money and organizing it for some common good. That's kind of a simple definition of what it is. You can have a short view of that or a long view of that. But I think we have an obligation as human beings sharing one planet, to be good and decent people and help someone else along the way.
Well, thank you for living that, because that's definitely you. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, it's, my definition of philanthropy, I probably didn't have one when I was young. But I know it's changed. When I was young, I went into the Peace Corps.
Cool.
And so you do these things that seem both exciting and give you a good payback, and have a check the box social conscience thing when you're young. And but more and more as I age, I'm so much more invested in very simple things. The health of the river, or preserving the Anastasia sparrow seems really important to me. I don't have to go to Africa to do something really good. And so at the end of the day, I think it has a lot to do with, I did one of those personality indicator tests, and I don't remember what the term was, but I summed it up as being a cheerful egoist. So I'm entirely optimistic about humans and about the world, and so I feel like whatever I can do to continue to, support a better world and better humans makes a lot of sense. And I just want to keep it simple, and then I have to keep reminding my egoist side of myself that you don't get anything back, or you can't ask for something back, that you have to just keep giving and not asking for anything in return, because no strings attached is the best way to give. So.
And you never know how that's going to come back to you, because I believe that everything that we put out does come back. And so look, but you're putting that out, and wow, here is this. And I want to encourage you to keep thinking in advance, keep that visionary process, because if you were on equal paths here, think about the next 20 years. My gosh, where is it going to be? Thank you both for coming on the show today. Really, I'm going to reach over real quick and shake your hand, because we're sitting about a football field apart, but nice to have you. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Rena.
Thank you.
This is going to wrap up today's Philanthropy Show. Make sure you join us next Monday at 4, and check out all the past shows in the Past Shows tab. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.
Do you have an idea for the Philanthropy Show? Contact us via our website or email us at tps@myvideovoice.com.